Hi, it's Rob from the Bush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint an Imperial Fists Primaris Intercessor. If you'd like to support the channel, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Now on to the video. So the first colour we're going to use is Vallejo Black. We'll use this to do all of the seals between the armour plates on his power armour. We're also going to use it to do the casing on his bolt rifle. This particular guy as well, the trim on the shoulder pads will also be black. It's another video that's been chosen by one of the patrons over on our Patreon page. It's made me realise why I haven't done too many Lamenters over the time that I've actually been collecting miniatures for them. And it's just because the yellow can take quite a while to do. So next up we're going to use Citadel Mephiston Red. I'm going to be using this on the Aquila, on his chest, and also on his helm. If you watch the video from the other Sunday, this is the guy whose helmet I was painting up for that video to do the Primaris helmets. Just because there's a lot of detail on such a small area, I thought it'd be worthwhile doing a quick vid showing how to get all those details and get them standing out. Next up, we're going to use some Vallejo Model Air Chrome. We're going to use this to do all of the metallic sections on the miniature. So we've got the tubes on the helm, parts of the bolt rifle, and the handle, or the pistol grip rather, of his bolt pistol. Then all the exhausts and whatnot on his power pack. So yeah, I was disappointed to decide not to do too many more Lamenters. I did really enjoy painting up the Knights of the Chalice fellas. I've actually painted up more of them than Lamenters, despite the amount of time that I had the Lamenters, so expect more Knights of the Chalice in the future. Next up, we've got Citadel Ahriman Blue, hidden behind his bolt rifle because it's too close. I'm just going to use this to paint his eye lenses. Like so. Now we're going for Citadel Mournfang Brown. We're going to use this to paint the belt and also all the pouches and the holster which are on his belt. Now I'm going to use Citadel Retributor armour to paint the gold sections on a miniature. Now there isn't too many. He's just got this little winged skull on his arm, and he's also got a winged skull on the side of his bolt rifle. So give both of those a dose of Retributor armour. That'll be that all finished. Also you can use this on the bolts in the magazine as well, if you can see them in the magazine that you've fitted to the miniature. Now we're going to start shading. We're going to use Citadel Druchii Violet to do the helmet and the chest Aquila. Should also mention he's been undercoated with TT Combat's Desert Yellow, I think it is, which is as close to Averland Sunset as I've found in a spray so far. Still a bit frustrated that they cancelled Averland Sunset when it was the colour that I used to base coat and undercoat the Lamenters, so which is another reason why they've been given the elbow. So next up we're going to be using a little bit of Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade, and this is just going to be to do his two eye lenses. Now we're going for Citadel Nuln Oil Gloss. I'm going to use this to do all of the areas where we use the Model Air Chrome. Now I'm using the gloss version just so that we can give it that little bit of extra shine, but if you do want to use the normal Nuln Oil, there's no problem with that, it will work just as well. Now just going to use some of the normal Nuln Oil. Use this on the little pipes on the side of the mast there. When I used the gloss didn't really shade them too much, so I thought best to give them a quick dose of the normal shade. I'm just using a little bit on the end of the bolt rifle as well, where you'd be getting a carbon build-up, just to darken that up a little bit. Now I'm going to be using Citadel Agrax Earthshade. This is just to do the Retributor armour areas, so the bolts in the magazine and the two winged skulls. Just give them a nice coat of Agrax Earthshade, and that'll darken them down, give them a nice shade. Next up we're going to be using some Citadel Fuegan Orange. I'm going to be using this to shade the yellow. Now I'm just putting the shade into the recesses rather than splatting it all over the miniature like I usually would do. And that's only because the yellow tends to be a bit of a pain to coat anything. So the less area that you have to paint over where you've put the shade, the better. So if you try and get that in a minimum number of places that you can, that'll just make your life easier when you come to reapply the yellows shortly. So working back on the colours now, I'm going to start off with Mephiston Red. I'm going to start working on the helm and the chest eagle. There's a section of showing the chest eagle getting done because this part was recorded for the Space Marine helmet video that was up a week or so ago. So we'll come back and do the chest eagle a little bit later, but you can do it now if you want to. From there we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Evil Sunz Scarlet. We're just going to highlight the top areas of this, so where it's getting almost to a vertical you want to stop applying the Evil Sunz Scarlet there. You want to be applying it to the top of all the ridges and any areas that will be catching the light. I'll link up the video for the Space Marine helmet so you can see this being done in full. Next is Citadel Wild Rider Red. We're going to use this to do the edge highlights. So you want to be on the edges that be catching the light on the helmet. So the bottom edge of the little vents in the front, the edge underneath the eye, the top edges of the little bits where the tubes and the pipes connect in. Next up is Citadel Ahriman Blue. I'm going to reapply this to the lenses. Now we're going to add a little bit of Vallejo White to the Ahriman Blue. I'm just going to put a little crescent of highlight on the sort of back third or back 2/3 of the lens there, leaving the front so you've just got the normal Ahriman blue and the shade. Like so. Next we're going to add a little bit more white. You can do about half of the area that you've just covered, but with a lighter shade now. Finally we're going to use a tiny little bit of white to put a spot on the front of each eye lens. And then a really thin line at the back of each eye lens where we've done the highlights, just to give them that final layer of reflection. Next, we're going to use a tiny little spot of Drakenhof Nightshade. I'm just going to use that to dull down the two spots at the front there because they're slightly bigger than I'd like them. So you can use this just to shrink down the size of those spots, get them down to the size that you would like them to be. Like so. Now I'm going to return to the yellow. I'm going to use Citadel Averland Sunset and start reapplying the base coat for the yellow. I'll say this is, I think it's TT Combat's Desert Yellow that I've used initially, so the Averland Sunset is a slightly different colour, but it is a pretty good match. Once you're reapplying this base coat, you can't really tell that it's a different yellow underneath. When you start reapplying the Averland Sunset, you may have to give it a second coat over those shades if you've gone onto the yellow a bit too much. Next up, we're going to use some Citadel Yriel Yellow. I'm going to start reapplying this to the areas that be catching more light. So you're looking at top edges and surfaces that will be getting more light, so about halfway down each side of the arm. You want to be stopping with this layer and leaving the underside of just the Averland Sunset, or if it's just left shaded over the undercoat, that should be sound. So with that down, we're going to go on to Citadel Flash Gitz Yellow. We're just going to do the final highlight on the main part of the armour before we do an edge highlight, and this just adds that little bit of brightness to the top areas that will be catching the light to give it a nice vivid yellow. It does take a while to do these yellows, I found, just because they are quite thin. They don't give as good a coverage as, say, a black or a red or anything like that. And finally, we're going to use some Citadel Dorn Yellow just to do edge highlights on each of these panels. So you want to be doing the top edges, or the edges that be catching the light if the light was shining from above, and just highlighting those with the Dorn Yellow. That'll give you that nice little crisp white line, just to really show the highlights on those. So because we didn't cover it earlier, we're now going to do the Aquila on the chest. So you're going to use Citadel Mephiston Red. And you're going to leave the shade in the recesses and then pick out all the other sections of it, so like the feathers that are going up the wings and the skull and the very tops of the wings too. And just give those a coat of Mephiston Red. Now using a little Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet, now I'm going to do the highlights on this. So the areas that I highlight are the very tips of the wings there, going about halfway down. The little sort of U shape around the skull in the middle. And then you want to be doing about half of each feather from the outer edge of it, going about halfway down with this colour. Finally, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Wild Rider Red. We're just going to do the tips of all those wings, or all those feathers rather, and also do a little bit on the very top section and on the skull as well, just to highlight those parts. like so. Next, Retributor armour. Going to reapply the colour to the winged skulls. A couple of very short layers this, because there's only those 3 small areas, the 2 winged skulls and then the bolts inside the magazine. So very quick to do this part. I'm going to use a little bit of Liberator gold to highlight that. Now we're going to add a little bit of Vallejo Model Air Chrome to the Liberator gold. We're just going to pick out those edges and the tips of the feathers on the wing, and also the top edges of the wing skulls. Like so. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Nuln Oil shade. I'm going to shade the leather pouches and the belt, which I failed to do earlier on. We can just add that in now, it doesn't really matter too much. Just be very careful when you're doing this, because you don't want to get any on the yellow. If you do, try and get your brush in there straight away to absorb that again, because it's a pain to get off once it's dry, or a pain to cover up again. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Mournfang brown to start reapplying the colour back to these pouches. You want to make sure that that shade is dry before you do this, because otherwise it will make a bit of a brown stroke Nuln Oil mess. Making sure that you leave the shade in the recesses and try and get the areas that be catching a bit more light too. Next up, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh, mix that with the Mournfang brown. Now we're going to use this layer to add a few chafes and scrapes to the edges of the leather. I'll link up the leather pouches video here, so you can see a start to finish of doing this in a little bit more slow time. You basically want to be going vertical strokes on the horizontal parts and horizontal strokes on the vertical, just to get that rough edge, so you haven't got smooth lines down each side of that. That just gives it the look that it's been worn, it's been scraped on stuff. Going to add a little bit more Rakarth flesh to the previous layer. We're just going to do one final highlight. Doing exactly the same brush strokes, but using a slightly thinner brush so that you get a little bit more of that rough edged highlight to it. Pouch is finished. We're now going to use a little bit of Vallejo White and start working on the chapter badge on the shoulder. So the first thing that we want to do is do a big white circle. There is a chapter badge video which went up on Sunday, I believe. I'll show you how to do start to finish of the chapter badge. It's going to give you a brief idea of what to do here, because it's a little bit more long-winded than I'd like to have in this video. So we've got that white circle on there. Now we're going to switch shoulder and use some Vallejo Black to paint the battle line icon on the right pauldron. So it's a fairly straightforward method of doing this. I'll link up the video of how to paint the battle line markings here. But you can see the basic method that I use to plan out the arrow, so you can get that pretty even in a quick and easy way. So back to the left pauldron now, and use a little bit of Vallejo Black and start doing the fist for the Imperial Fist chapter badge. As I say, there is a video for this, I'll link here. But the basic method I use for doing anything is break it down into smaller sections. So that it makes it easier to work on then. You can get one of them roughly done, work on the next one, get them both roughly done, and then kind of edit them both together and tweaking how they look. Now we've got Vallejo White, and we're just using this to do the numeral on the side. We're going to have him as 5th squad, so it's going to be a big V. So I tend to just draw a large V on the arrow and then thicken up the left hand line, which annoyingly you can't quite see here because it's just off screen. And once I've done that, do the little horizontal lines at the top of each arm. And then you can tweak that with a little bit of black just to get that into the perfect shape that you want it. So now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black, and we're going to start working on the seals between the armour, just touching up any areas that we might have gone over with any of the other colours. I was going to start on the casing of the bolt rifle and the trim of the shoulder armour too. So once we've got the base coats for all those done, we're going to move on to using a little bit of Vallejo German Grey. We're going to start highlighting the areas that are black. So for the seals between the armour plates, you want to just be highlighting the crests of those. And for the casing of the bolt rifle and for the shoulder pads, you want to be thinking about where the light is catching it and just highlighting those areas. Slightly blurry here as it's moved out the focal point. Then the final colour, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Mechanicus Standard Grey. We're just going to use this to do some edge highlights on all the sections that we've done in black, except for the seals between the armour plates, which we're going to leave with just the German Grey highlights, as I like to think of them almost like a very dull rubber, so they don't reflect too much light. So once you've added the highlights to the bolt rifle and the shoulder trim, that is the completed Imperial Fist. Now this is the finished fellow. Really happy with how it turned out. Another great chapter ticked off.
Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media, linked below. Thanks very much.
If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, our Ko-fi and Patreon pages are linked below. Thanks very much.